going on, guys? It's your boy. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing a full-length movie review for the new Ballerina movie, the spinoff from the John Wick franchise starring Ana de Armas. Personally, I thought this movie was very middle of the road. It had some good, it had some bad. Let's dive into it, shall we?
Modern movie review.
Okay, so I'm going to preface this video by saying I have only seen the first John Wick movie. I have not seen John Wick 2, John Wick 3, John Wick 4. I haven't seen any of those yet. I plan on eventually getting to them. I think, and this is probably a really weird thing to say because of how much I am into like superhero movies, I'm honestly not that huge of a fan of action. Like, a lot of times in action movies, when it's just like constant action and people beating each other up over and over and over again, I tend to think that a lot of these films don't have a good plot and a good reason to really be fully watching the movie. And I think for the most part, an action sequence is only as important as the emotional ties that kind of go with it. So this is just overall not my genre to watch, which I know is kind of like a crazy thing to say because like most guys, yeah, action movie. That's what they're going to the movies to see. So for the most part, any gripes that I have with this movie or anytime I'm like, wow, this part of the plot really doesn't work, I know that somebody out there is probably thinking, yeah, well, that needs to happen so the movie can happen. But that being said, I feel like there's better ways that this movie could have potentially been written in a way that it didn't necessarily need to be this stagnant in scenes. So I'm going to dive full into this. This might be one of my shortest movie reviews ever because as much as I have a lot to say about it, I have a couple quick positives, a couple quick negatives, and it's going to be relatively quick. So, first thing I do want to go ahead and say, Ana de Armas does an incredible job in this movie. I do think that her acting performance is great. I think that she brings a lot of emotional gravitas to this movie, and I think that overall, she does a good job with the script she is given. Now, that being said, the script, the story, the plot that she is given, not incredibly great. I think that the vengeance arc that she has isn't that fantastic. I think that for the most part, yeah, she watches her father die at a very young age, but then she goes into this orphanage where she kind of has like the opportunity to become a ballerina and to become this assassin. And it seems like for the most part, she has kind of like a support system with her that she doesn't necessarily need to go down the assassin route. And she ends up picking this path for herself where she goes down the route of becoming an assassin. She can do all this really cool ballet stuff. And for the most part, it definitely seems like she's very much doing what she wants to do with her life, but she's so filled with rage and this revenge and wanting to go after the people who killed her father, even though for the most part, she's been told multiple times, hey, this is off limits. Hey, you're not supposed to be doing this. Hey, this wasn't the plan. You're supposed to be working with us. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. And the rage and the revenge of it all makes a little bit of sense, but at the same time, it's also like we don't flesh out her relationship with her father very much before the movie really starts. And for the most part, she has her entire life where she potentially could have moved on and tried to have more of a normal life. And I think that this movie could have been a lot more interesting if they showed her trying to live a normal life instead of immediately being just forced into being an assassin and spending her entire life training to become an assassin. I just feel like for the most part, what makes the original John Wick movie so interesting is that he's more or less a normal guy at the beginning of the movie. He finally was able to retire from that life, and he's been living like a normal life for the last 4 or 5 years, and then he's dragged back into having to be an assassin, and he's kind of like begrudgingly being an assassin. And there's the epic scene where there's like, I'm starting to think that I'm really back or whatever, because they're like, oh my god, John Wick is really back. And he's just like pissed because he doesn't want to have to be an assassin, but he ends up going into becoming an assassin. And something that I think really makes this movie even more painful for me personally when it comes to the plot elements of it is there's a scene relatively early on in the movie before she becomes this diehard assassin and she's sent on all of her first missions where she's talking to John Wick and she's like, how do you get out of this? How do you do the things that you do? And he's just like, the door is open. You still have a chance to leave. You do not want to join this life. And she doesn't even for a second think, you know what? Maybe I could go live a normal life. Maybe I could live a peaceful life. And instead, she's like, I'm going to go become an assassin. That's what I'm going to do right now. And I think that that's just like, doesn't really give her an opportunity to like grow and change as a character. And it honestly makes it where it's not as interesting that she chose the assassin life because that's all she ever knew. And because we kind of like flash forward through her childhood, we don't really have her battling with that like, well, could I try to live a normal life? Or no, I have to be an assassin. I just think that that's really disappointing. And then on top of that, this movie is called Ballerina, and they have one montage at the beginning of the movie where they're showing that like she's learning how to do ballet and she's doing all these different things. She's doing like pirouettes and she's doing, you know, all the things on the super tippy toes or whatever that is insanely difficult to do. And I was really excited because I'm like, okay, Ballerina, I know because I took 8 years of dance classes. Ballet is insanely hard. Like it's one of those things where it's like you'll make fun of a guy for doing ballet. He's 9 times stronger than you. He's 10 times stronger than you. You do not understand the amount of core strength, leg strength, all of that in between that it takes to do ballet. So when I saw that this movie was called Ballerina and that there's sequences with her actually doing ballet, that they're probably going to have at least a couple fight sequences in this movie that shows off her having to have like incredible balance, incredible core strength, and maybe potentially like some battles where she's like completely surrounded and she can do some cool spins and stuff to like completely knock out all of the people around her. And not to say that this movie doesn't have creative action sequences, because it absolutely does, but it doesn't have any action sequences that scream, oh my god, she's a ballerina. And I understand it's just a name, that's not necessarily the point of the whole movie is for her to be a ballerina. But at the same time, you make an effort in the first 10 minutes of the movie to be like, oh, by the way, she knows how to do all these cool ballet stuff. And you never once have her like walk on a tightrope, which is something that would showcase her ability to tippy toe. You don't have her, like I said, doing any cool spins or anything like that. And it's like, what was the point of making her a ballerina? Like, obviously she has that little ballerina doll that she has from when her father, you know, was killed in front of her. She had this little thing to kind of like calm her down and peace, you know, be something that can kind of like bring her peace whenever she's like having a lot of discomfort and there's a lot of stress going on in her life. But at the same time, we never really get to see her doing any ballet things, and it's not a big part of the plot. And in my opinion, calling this movie Ballerina would almost be like if you called the first John Wick movie the name of his dog, because it's like something that is in the first act, is very important in the first act, and kind of like drives them forward because like this is, you know, a big part of their life. And I don't know, that's such a nitpicky thing. I'm so sorry. That is such a nitpicky thing. But it's one of those things where I'm like, it's just a missed opportunity. And another thing about this movie that I do kind of hate is if you're going to make a big part of your movie the fact that you have a female antagonist, just make her a badass fucking character. Do not harp so heavily on the fact that, oh my god, she is a woman, because there are a couple of lines of dialogue where it's just like, okay, and you just took away all of the progressiveness of this movie. And I think that one of my like big things about this, I'm gonna try to see if I can find the clip. There's a scene from one of the old Sonic cartoons where Amy kind of mentions that like she's like, I'm gonna do it like a girl, and then Knuckles is kind of like, oh, but actually, like, that's basically implying that girls aren't supposed to be as good as men. Like, what is wrong with you?
Can the young woman break the glass ceiling and prove once and for all that a female can be just as good an athlete as a male?
You know, Amy, anytime someone calls attention to the breaking of gender rules, it ultimately undermines the concept of gender equality by implying that this is an exception and not the status quo. What? Just because I'm a meathead doesn't mean I'm not a feminist.
And it kind of is like that in this movie, where it's just like, you being like, oh, well, this is impressive because she's a girl, almost undermines the fact that, like, it would be impressive in it if anybody does it, but now you're making it less progressive because you're having to bring up the fact that she is in fact a woman. Like, that drove me insane so many times, because there's scenes where she's training and they're talking about how, like, you're never going to have the upper hand. You have to cheat. You have to get creative. You have to use your brain. And they're kind of like building up this like brains versus bronze kind of argument. And then they end it by saying, fight like a girl. And it seems like a moment where you're supposed to be like applauding, but it's like, okay, well, that entire scene that was really epic and really sick just got undermined because they're like, and it's also good because you're a woman, yeah. And it kills me because you can have a woman-led movie and then be a badass character, then be incredibly cool without necessarily having to compare them to men and be like, well, they're great because they're at the same level as this man. Stop doing that. Just let the woman be a badass woman, and then we as the audience will be like, hell yeah, she was sick. She was a great, awesome character because she is a badass woman. Like, this movie drove me insane with that element. But yeah, overall, the action sequences relatively solid. I think that there is a solid like hour full of action in this movie. And something that I do like about this film is they do a really good job, especially with some of her earlier fight sequences when she's first getting into becoming an assassin, where they'll show her getting really overpowered at the beginning of fight sequences and then having to kind of like look around the room to see what small things she could do to get advantage. And she'll start off, you know, very like overpowered and then use some really creative way to get out of some of the fight sequences. So there's a lot of fun action in this movie. I do think it is really good. There's a really cool spy espionage like vibe to this third act, because she ends up going into the city where she knows that there's this cult and she doesn't realize it, but the entire city is the cult. So she's fighting literally everybody, and the entire city is after her, and it leads to some really epic escape sequences. It leads to a lot of really cool parkour moments, and like the child in me who absolutely loved like Assassin's Creed, I was like, oh my god, there's some really epic moments, because like I said, she's having to like run away from the entire city, and she's having to do some really cool like flips and tricks and stuff like that. So I did have a really good time with that. And that was another time where I was like, there could be some cool ballet stuff in here, but I digress. I understand that's not the point of the movie. And then obviously John Wick eventually gets sent after her, and John Wick kind of has a talk with her in a heart-to-heart where he's like, I don't want to kill you. You have until midnight to take care of this situation, and I'll let you off the hook. And then she eventually goes on to take care of her situation. I do appreciate the fact John Wick was not a huge character in this movie. Like, yeah, he does come in and you see him multiple times throughout the entire length of the film, but you can tell it was just kind of like one of those things where they're like, let's get Keanu Reeves in here enough that we can justify him having the marketing campaign where he's here and he's like, oh my god, hey, by the way, I'm in this movie. And I like that. I thought that was really good. But yeah, overall, I liked this movie. I think that some of the emotional sequences could have been a little bit better. Like, there's a scene where she meets somebody who's a part of the cult and realizes that it's her long-lost sister, and they have this really interesting conversation about, like, destiny and fate, because the cult is, like, everything happens for a reason, and that's something they're very big in believing, and they're kind of, like, trying to control their own fate here. And the sister brings up a really good point, which is, like, you think that you had a choice, but you're here fighting me and becoming an assassin. Did you really choose that route, or is that the route that was chosen for you? And it does, like I said, if we knew more about her childhood and how she had to like become an assassin, that could have been a really great moment, but we didn't get that. And it does really like suck, because I'm like, this would be really great if they had fleshed out that character a little bit more. But that being said, overall, I did have a good time with this movie. I think that the action's really good. I just absolutely hated on it for the entire length of this movie. I think it's a very middle of the road movie, and I think that it just kind of suffers from the fact that like John Wick is really good, right? And when you're comparing this to John Wick, it doesn't quite reach those same levels. But yeah, that being said, I had a good time with this movie. If I had to give it a rating on a scale of 1 to 100, I give this a solid like 73. I really could not get on board with the plot for this movie. I think that her revenge plot is just really weak, and they don't do a lot to like flesh out her out as like a more interesting character. Like, she doesn't have anything more than just like, you killed my father, I'm gonna chase after you. And that's about it. But yeah, that being said, that was it for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by checking it out. If you guys disagree with me, please feel free to let me know why you loved this movie, because I wish I did love this movie. But yeah, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and sign out. If you liked it, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Bow, bow, bow.